Did anybody have any idols when you were growing up? Just someone that you really looked to and admired? Come on, shoot me a name if you got one. The Beatles. So we got Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and John Lennon. Nice. Who else we got? I'm not sure if he's a person or a band, but someone did worship and idolize Leonard Skinner. Anybody else? Martin Luther King, Captain America. Got some good one, and I'm not sure about the other one, but Neil Armstrong, good. Helen Keller, good. You guys are good. The first one was all athletes. Like we had your father. That's a good one. Good one. So I had one. His name was Magic Johnson. You guys ever hear of him before? Magic Johnson, man, the guy could play basketball. I wanted to be a basketball player when I was growing up, and then when I was in 8th grade, I stopped growing, and I realized there wasn't much of a market for a short, uncoordinated person who couldn't jump, but still idolized the guy. I remember when he played at Michigan State. I grew up in northwest Iowa, and they would play Iowa a couple times a year, and it was, I would cheer for the Hawkeyes. It was absolutely amazing to watch the guy. I mean, he was, they call him Magic for a reason. He went to the Lakers. He played there his entire career. When an NBA player gets a triple-double now, it's a big deal. You make SportsCenter. There was one year, 1982, that Magic Johnson almost averaged a triple-double. 9.6 rebounds, 9.7 assists, and 17 points a game. The world had never seen anything like him before. The Lakers, I think they won 5 or 6 championships during that time. I was on a high school baseball team. Growing up in a small town, that doesn't mean I was a good baseball player. It just means that I had a pulse above 50, and they needed warm bodies out on the field. But I actually skipped a high school baseball game to stay home and watch the epic Game 6 between Larry Bird and the Celtics and Magic Johnson and the Lakers. Now, that was Magic Johnson. He won a lot of championships, but he also lost a lot of games, didn't he? At the end of his career, he was no longer the game's greatest player. He was replaced by this young upstart, and do you guys know his name? Good, Michael Jordan. He had a number of well-documented off-the-court issues. There was 2 failed attempts at a comeback. Now, the idol eventually lost its luster. And even when the idol had its luster shining very brightly, I would still say that as an idol, there was still emptiness in my life that Magic Johnson just could not fulfill. There's been idols and there's been counterfeit gods that have come in my life before Magic Johnson, and there's been some in my life that have been here after Magic Johnson. And each one, although it shined pretty brightly, there was emptiness that still existed with each and every one of these counterfeit gods. And so it is with life. Alex de Tocqueville was a French historian and a French writer. He lived at the last part of the 1700s and the early part of the 1800s. And his writing, he loved America. He loved the United States. He loved the idea. He loved the people. He loved the government. He saw the prosperity that Americans had. And, he would basically write to the rest of the world, these guys have got things figured out. And even 200 years later, we still, you listen to political speeches, you read, political ads, and they quote this man, who was a Frenchman 200 years later. Now, one of the things that he wrote, and this is very profound, he says, and what he's writing about here is, at that time, and it still is this way today, at that time, the United States was the most abundant, the wealthiest country that had ever existed. And we still, as Americans, we're blessed. Financially and with our freedom, we are a blessed group of men, women, and children. But here's what he says. He says, a strange melancholy haunts the inhabitants of America in the midst of their abundance. And life is abundant for us. Compared to the rest of the world, life politically and economically and socially is very abundant for us. And he says, even in spite of this abundance, there's this strange melancholy that haunts the inhabitants of this great nation. And here's what he continues with. He says, the incomplete joys of the world will never satisfy the human heart. You can have all the land in the world, and that is never going to satisfy your human heart. You can get more money, and that more money is not going to satisfy your human heart. There can be more security. We can save for a rainy day, we can plan, and we can prepare. But all that does is provide us partial security. And even in this partial security, it does not fill the deepest needs of our human heart. For some of us, it might be achievement, it might be control, it might be beauty. We have a little bit more control over some people that we want to have control over. We have a little bit more beauty than we had the day before. But this does not satisfy the desires, the deep desires of our human heart. We can have better relationships, better sex, more approval from other people. And none of these things, absolutely none of these things, are going to satisfy our lives at the depths of our human heart. It will never be enough. What de Tocqueville says is true. The incomplete joys of this world will never, ever satisfy our human heart. Never. Now, we're going to talk about idolatry for 6 weeks. Today, we're launching a sermon series called Gods at War. Now, there are gods at war in my life, and there's gods at war in your life. It could be gods with a small g that are competing for the primary place in your heart. It could be a god with a small g is competing with the god with a capital G, for the primary place in your heart. It could be that God's creation is competing with God the Creator for the primary place in your human heart. Now, we hear about idolatry and we think, okay, Craig, this idolatry stuff is kind of like, last century's news. I understand the Old Testament, they used to build statues and they would bow down and worship them, but we just don't do that anymore. I would understand that they would have, mythical gods and they would worship those gods, but, we just don't have those gods. Well, I will say the same gods that they had when this text was written are the same gods that we have today. Let's look at the Greek mythology and the Greek gods. There's Aphrodite, who is the god of beauty. And I would say that there's many of us that kneel down and worship the god of Aphrodite. I believe that there's many young women, many women in general. There's a body image that has been portrayed for you by society, and if we don't quite meet this image, we don't feel like we're quite as valuable as those who do. Depression or eating disorders can come into our lives. I believe that there's guys that can go to the gym and we can try to lose some fat and gain some muscles, because if we have this type of body, we can attract this type of person. If we attract this type of person, we can have this type of relationship. And if we can have this type of relationship, we can have this type of life, but it all starts at the gym. So what we do is we get down and we worship the god of beauty. There's Artemis, who is the god of wealth. I think this is a big one for many of us. I think that money, probably in today's culture, is God's chief rival. Money and career can be raised to cosmic proportions, but here's the problem. When we raise our career and we take something that's good and we try to turn it into something that's supreme, we have to do something. We have to make an offering. And what we do when we do this is we bring our children to the altar and we sacrifice them for something that God never intended to be of supreme importance. There's another god that we worship, the god of war, and this is Ares. Now, people can elevate control and power over other people. These can be our gods. If we just control, these people in our life, then our life is going to make sense. If we just have power and, no one can tell us what we're going to do, then our life is going to make sense. But the problem is this, if you're in a relationship with somebody that you have power over, if you're in a relationship of someone that you're seeking to control, it is going to be impossible to have intimacy in that relationship, and you are created for intimacy. So what we do by trying to gain power and control over people is we bring to the altar and we sacrifice intimacy and relational solidarity that God intends for our life. So let's talk about number 2. Let's talk about money just for a second. I'm going to just use this as an example. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, Paul is succinct and he is to the point. He says that greed is idolatry. Now, I want you to hear this, and I'm going to say it twice because I want you to hear it twice. Money is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that money is a bad thing. Money can be a very good thing. You know, the shirts that are on our backs, money paid for those. The food that is going to be in our stomachs as we have lunch after this is funded by money. The roof that is over our head at night that protects us from the elements, it's money. You know, yesterday, we collected those 1,500 pounds of food at the grocery store. Over the year, we collected 10,000 pounds of food. It is money that funded that. People walk into these grocery stores and they make a choice. They say, you know what, instead of buying this or buying that or have a little bit left over, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest some of my money in our community, and we're going to feed some hungry people today. Money made that possible. Money will help us to enjoy life. Money can give us partial security. Like I said, it doesn't give us full security, but it can give us partial security as we move toward old age. I'll also say that money is very helpful in spreading the gospel. Money is very helpful in spreading the gospel. The very reason that I'm up here right now is because y'all have worked very hard. The reason that I'm able to be up here right now is because many of you have made sacrifices. You have said no to other things so that you can say yes to the church because you believe in our vision, because you believe in our mission. Now, there's not a Sunday that I come up here and I am not grateful, for your investment in God's kingdom. Money can be a very good thing, but we know that phrase, don't we? There can be too much of a good thing. Now, money could almost, just like any other good thing, it can become an addiction. And like all addictions, money will hide its true proportions from its victims. So let's say we got some of this good thing. We were able to buy something new, or we were able to go somewhere really cool. And we think, okay, if I just had a little bit more of this good thing, I would be even happier. So we start working longer. And we start working harder. And then we start bringing our work home for us and the people that are most important to us. Even if we're not working, we're checked out because we were thinking about what happened that day, or we're thinking about what might happen tomorrow. So all of a sudden, the snowball starts to go down the hill. And it's picking up momentum, and it's picking up more snow, and all of a sudden it becomes pretty dangerous. Now, we develop somewhere along the line, if we possess a certain thing, if I could live in this neighborhood, or if I could have this television, or if our family could go on this vacation, then things will be fine. And we believe that. Then all of a sudden we become attached to things. And the moment we become attached to things, this addiction happens, and this big snowball is now out of control. Now, if you don't believe me, I want you to go back to October 6th of 2008. Does anyone remember what happened on the week of October 6th through October 10th of 2008? That week, the stock market lost 19% of its value. There was some anxiety that was existing in our country at that time because something that we have attached ourselves to was now threatened. Over the next 6 months, this was absolutely crazy, and you remember this. By March 6th of 2009, the market had fallen over 50%. Some people nearing retirement, some people in retirement are thinking, this is not the way this is supposed to work. I worked hard. I worked long. I sacrificed some very important things at the altar so I could have, this projection of security. When we have an attachment, and when that attachment is either threatened or gone, anxiety happens. Now, money can become like an idol, like any other idol. Money can be a very good thing, but there can be too much of a good thing. It's not meant to be turned into a supreme thing. What will happen is the demands of the idol will override all competing interests. Now, one thing you need to know about counterfeit gods is long-term, they are never going to satisfy us. Long-term, they are always going to disappoint, and oftentimes they're going to be destructive. So let's go to the Old Testament. We're going to look at what is by far the most prolific and important moral teaching in all the world, not just for Christians. You look at the three monotheistic religions, the three major ones. You have Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They would all say that the Ten Commandments that Moses received from God are their primary moral teaching. Now let's go to Exodus chapter 20. We'll start at verse 3. Now this is the first of the Ten Commandments. God is about ready to open up his mouth to Moses, and oftentimes you kind of start off with the most important thing. It's like, Moses, if you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember command number 1. It's very simple. It's very succinct. God simply says to Moses, "You shall have no other gods before me." Nothing. No other gods. Nothing else. Just me and you. That's your primary relationship. And we talk about idolatry, and it's something we don't talk a lot about in the church. We talk about the fruit of idolatry, which is sin, a lot. But idolatry in the Bible is mentioned 1,000 times, over 1,000 times. The Bible teaches us about the dangers of idolatry. Just 50 times in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, God gives us 50 commands on idolatry. The first 2 of the 10 commandments are about idolatry. Idolatry is the tree. It's the root of where the sin, the fruit, grows. We talk a lot about sin, but idolatry is the issue. Idolatry is always the issue. Now in verse 4, he gives us the second command. Here the Bible says, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or earth beneath or the waters below. You shall not bow down and worship them." Now let me give us a few examples. There's a man, and he's a pretty well-to-do man. He's fairly wealthy, and he decides that he's going to take a shortcut, and he is not going to report all of his income to the IRS. So basically what he's doing is he is cheating on his taxes. Now he justifies this, and he says, I work hard. In fact, I worked really hard, and I'm going to do a better job of spending my money than the government is going to, so I'm not going to report this. I won't get caught. It's no big deal. I just think if we all did that, our government would collapse. We're in bad enough shape the way it is. Just think if people started doing that and thinking that way. Now, the sin here is stealing. That's a sin, but that's not the issue. The issue is idolatry. This man has made money his God. He has placed it above all competing interests, including the welfare of the people of the country. Without idolatry, there's no sin. Or think about this one. There's a woman who paints a very false picture of another person to put the woman herself in a positive light. Now, people look at this woman and they think, this woman has it all together here. She's bright. She's well-liked. People think highly of her. But the problem is she doesn't think highly of herself. So what she does is she's going to belittle somebody else to make her feel better. Now, what's the sin here? The sin is gossip. The sin is intentionally hurting another person. But that's the fruit. The tree is her need to be loved and approved by other people. Idolatry is always going to be the issue. Now, what is an idol? An idol is anything that is more important to you than God. An idol is anything that's more important to you than God. Anything that grabs your heart, anything that grabs your vision, anything that grabs your imagination more than God, that's an idol. Anything that you seek that should give you only what God can give you, that's an idol. If there's a controlling passion in your heart that you spend most of your time and most of your energy and most of your resources, and you don't even think a second thought about it, there's a pretty good chance that is going to be an idol. That's going to be a counterfeit God. I'm just going to run through a list, and as I go through this list, what I want you to do is try to find yourself somewhere on this list. Because I think that most of us are going to find ourselves on this list one place or another. One type of idol that we can have is a person. It could be a child. It could be a person that we're in a relationship with. Have you ever heard someone say, I just don't know what my life would be like if I didn't have this person? I love this person so much. I couldn't imagine my world without them. Now, the problem is not that we're not loving these people enough. The problem is that we're not putting God in control of our relationships. The problem is that we don't love God enough. Another one might be a career. A career can be an idol. Look at the time, look at the energy, look at the emotional resources. Some of us are spending on things that are not of a supreme importance. A sports team can be an idol. Achievement can be an idol. Public image can be an idol. Technology, for many of us, it can be an idol that we always want to be connected to the world. Security, beauty, brains, food, sex, control over other people, a political or a social cause. All these things can be idols in our lives. Now, one of the things you'll notice is all these things are good. All these things are good, but none of them were ever meant to be supreme. So we can have too much of a good thing. An idol is wherever you look in your life and you say in your heart, if I have that, if I have more of that, then my life will have more meaning. And the moment my life has more meaning, my life will have more value. And then when my life has more value, I'll feel more significance and security in my life. So think about the list. Think about where you are on that list. Think about some of your counterfeit gods, some of your idols. When we attempt to place these things into supreme importance, we are going to be disappointed 10 times out of 10. And some of the times we're going to be devastated. Let's say your God is having approval from other people. Let's just say if somehow you could finagle and manage approval from every imperfect person you know, and everybody thought you were the perfect person, they told you that 10 times a day. Does that give you salvation? No, it doesn't. Think about security. You had the best doctors, and you had the most money, and you had the safest house, and you just felt that everything was protected, and you were secure. Does this offer us forgiveness of sin? Think about if you're the smartest and the wealthiest and the most beautiful person in the world, but you didn't have a relationship where you were able to love somebody and you didn't feel authentically loved by anybody. All these other idols wouldn't matter a darn bit, would they? Now, some questions for us to think about what our idols are, our counterfeit gods. One of them is, what is it that disappoints you? Think about some of your disappointments in life. There's a pretty good chance that disappointments are God's way of reminding us that we have idols in our life that need to be dealt with. Now, a very related one, but it's a little bit different. Think about the things you complain about. Don't just ask someone after church. Don't do it now; it'd be kind of awkward. But ask someone what is it that I complain about? There's a pretty good chance that this might be one of your idols. I think probably the best way to do it is, where do I make my financial sacrifices? Is it in security? Is it in stuff? Is it in sports? Jesus in the New Testament, he says, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. The last one I want you to consider is, what are your dreams? What is it that you're thinking about before you go to bed at night? What is it that you're thinking about when you wake up in the morning? What is it that you're thinking about when you're alone in the car and you have a little bit of time to daydream? There's a pretty good chance that the things that you dream about have a very good chance of being counterfeit gods or idols in your life. Now, back to the book of Joshua in chapter 24. Joshua is telling the people here that they need to make a choice. They have to choose between the gods of their ancestors. They have to choose between the gods that they experienced in Egypt. They have to choose between the gods of the Amorites in the land that they're currently living. And they have to choose between God himself. Joshua says you got to make a choice. You can't have your cake and eat it too. there is only room in your heart for one primary thing. Now, we read this text and we think, okay, this doesn't make sense. They got the gods that the ancestors worshipped in the Euphrates, and the gods that they experienced in Egypt, and the gods that they have in the Amorite city where they now live. This doesn't make sense to me, and it should make sense to all of us. It goes like this. We all have gods from our ancestors. Things that our grandparents taught our parents, and things that our parents taught to us. For me, the God was hard work. My grandpa moved to northwest Iowa from Stavanger, Norway in 1939. By 1942, he was fighting in World War II for the United States. 1945, he was back, and for the next 45 years of his life, the man worked hard. He came here penniless, and when he died 10 years ago, he was pretty well-to-do, and it was because he worked hard, and that was taught to my dad, and it was taught to me. It was a God that I grew up with. It's a God that I've had to deal with. It's a God that I still occasionally have to deal with in my life. The harder I work, the more value I have. The more value I have, the better I am. Therefore, we do this. That's the God of my ancestors. You have a God of your ancestors as well. Then he talks about the God that you experienced in Egypt. This is the God of our past. It's the God of our individual past. I can only tell my story. Mine, probably as I look back, is the God of approval from other people. I quit a job as working in finance and economics in my early to mid-20s to become a pastor. And the reason I authentically wanted to help people. And I was fed when people approved me. So I remember the first job I got, it was a youth minister at St. Andrew United Methodist Church in Marietta, Georgia. Now I got there, and they absolutely loved the youth minister who was there before me. I think it was like him, and there's Jesus. They loved this guy. And I went there, and I wasn't this guy. I wasn't Jesus. And I went home to Amber, and I said, I don't think anyone liked me. And, for a person that needed approval, this God was not meeting my needs. And over the years, I've had to realize that, we can't please everybody. But what we can do is be faithful to God. And when we can learn that we can put this idol aside for something a whole lot better, that's when our life starts to make sense. Now, the God of the Amorites is today. And as I look at my life today, I think probably the biggest challenge for me is probably technology. Just to be wired to the world 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The email never shuts off, the text messaging never shuts off, and there has to come a time in the day, there has to come a time in the week, there has to come a time in the year where I just turn all this stuff off, because it can become a god. What would your life be like if someone took your cell phone from you for a week? Well, at first there might be some anxiety. I think after you try it for a while, you might like it a lot. But it's a God that some of us face. Now, you have gods of your ancestors. You have gods of your past, and you have gods of today. Counterfeit gods, idols that we deal with. Now, what Joshua says, it goes like this. You got to choose. You got to choose between the gods of the ancestors, gods of the past, gods of today, or God. And then Joshua says, I'm going to make a little recommendation. I don't know about you. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. But I'm going to tell you about this God. The hard work is going to get you somewhere. It's not a bad thing. Trying to get the approval of other people, that means you're serving them, loving them. Maybe not a bad thing. Being connected to other people, maybe not a bad thing. But I'm going to tell you someone who's a lot better. Because there was a day, this guy Abraham, and as you go back to Joshua chapter 24, verse 1, this is where he starts. He said, there's a guy named Abraham, and I promised him that he would be the descendant of the nations. And I promised him that there would be more descendants than there were stars in the sky. And then he had a son, Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, who would be the father of Israel. And there's a time that the offspring of these people, would be in captive in Egypt. And guess what? It wasn't their hard work. It wasn't their people pleasing. It wasn't their technology that saved them. It was me. I sent a plague there, and I let them escape. There was a day that they were in the wilderness, and there was a day that they needed some darkness, and I provided darkness. There was a day that they needed light, and I provided light. There was a day that they needed the sun to stand still, and I stopped the sun. There was a day when the Egyptian army was chasing them, and the river was raging in front of them, and I stopped the river dead in its tracks, and I let them cross the river. Yeah, it was me, and all these other wars that you fought since then, it wasn't your weapons, it wasn't your ingenuity, it wasn't your strength, it wasn't your planning. It was me who got you to where you are. And as we look back on our life, we can see God's hand all over it. You've experienced grace. You've experienced hope. You've experienced community. You've experienced the forgiveness of sins. When you were at your lowest moment, God was there. Not the counterfeit gods that, overpromise and underdeliver, but the God who keeps his promises. Now, Jesus says the exact same thing as Joshua. Joshua says, you guys choose whatever you want to choose. It's your choice. It's your call. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, verse 23, he says, what I want you to do is seek first the kingdom of God. Seek that first, not the hard work, not the people-pleasing, not the technology, not the gods of our ancestors, of our past, of our culture. Seek the kingdom of God above all. Seek this first. Live righteously. And he will give you everything that you need. The place that God wants is the primary place in your heart. The place that God wants is the primary place in your life. And I just got a couple questions, and then I'll pray. What would your life look like? Think about this question. What would your life look like if you completely put God first in your life? If you loved God the most? If you experienced his grace and you were completely resourced by his power? How would that change your relationships? You just think how you'd be able to love the people that you love the most, if you could see them through God's eyes, if you could love them like God loved them, if you could give them the same grace that God has given you. We can love people more by putting God first. Think about a self-destructive habit that you have, or a destructive habit that you have that might be hurting somebody else. It's like, God, I'm going to give you this anger because it's hurting me and it's hurting other people. And even though I like the control and even though I like the power, I'm going to put you first. We're not giving up anything by putting God first. What we're doing is we're receiving everything. The promise of Jesus is that he will give you everything. He will give you everything that you need. Let us pray.